Hi everyone. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today, we're going to embark on a terrifying short stories under 10 minutes. A journey through different cultures, exploring some of the scariest horror stories from around the world. But before we begin, I want to know, what is the scariest horror story you've ever heard? Share it in the comments, and let's discover together what lies ahead.
1. The Forgotten Playground of Harlem. In Harlem, there was an old playground that locals avoided. They said it was haunted by the ghost of a child who disappeared decades ago. I was skeptical, so one evening I decided to visit. The playground was eerily silent, and the equipment was rusted and worn. As I walked around, I heard the faint sound of a child's laughter. It grew louder, and I saw a shadow darting between the swings. I called out, but there was no response. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I felt a hand grasp mine. Looking down, I saw the ghostly figure of a little boy. He smiled and whispered, "Play with me." Terrified, I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. The world around me began to blur, and I felt myself being pulled into the darkness. When I awoke, I was sitting on a swing, surrounded by other ghostly children. The boy looked at me and said, "Now you'll never be alone." I realized with horror that I had become one of them, forever trapped in the forgotten playground. 2. The Ghostly Cab Ride of Queens. Late one night in Queens, I hailed a cab to get home. The driver seemed normal enough, but as we drove, I noticed he was taking a strange route. The streets grew darker and more deserted, and I felt a sense of unease. I asked where we were going, but he just smiled and said, "You'll see." The cab's interior grew colder, and I saw shadows moving outside the windows. Panic set in, and I tried to open the door, but it was locked. The driver's smile grew wider, revealing sharp teeth. He whispered, "You can't escape." The cab came to a stop in front of an old, abandoned cemetery. The driver turned to me, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. He said, "Welcome to your final destination." I screamed as the shadows outside began to close in. When I awoke, I was lying on a tombstone, surrounded by ghostly figures. I later learned that anyone who took that cab was never seen again, their souls trapped in the cemetery forever. 3. The Phantom Tenement of the Lower East Side. In the Lower East Side, I rented a cheap apartment in an old tenement building. The place had a history of strange occurrences, but I didn't believe in ghosts. That changed when I started hearing footsteps in the hallway at night. The footsteps were accompanied by faint whispers and the smell of decay. One night, I decided to investigate. I followed the sounds to the basement, where I found a hidden door. Behind it was a dark, narrow corridor filled with old, rotting furniture. As I walked deeper, I felt a cold hand brush my face. Suddenly, I was surrounded by ghostly figures, their eyes empty and hollow. They whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I tried to run, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. The figures grew closer, and I felt their icy touch. Just as I was about to give up, I found myself back in my apartment, the door to the basement sealed shut. The next morning, I discovered that the basement had been condemned years ago after a fire that killed several tenants. I realized with horror that their spirits were still trapped, and I had narrowly escaped joining them. 4. The Haunted Pier of Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, there was an old pier known for its ghost stories. Fishermen claimed to see ghostly figures at night, but I thought it was just a local legend. One evening, I decided to visit the pier. The air was thick with fog, and the water was eerily still. As I walked along the wooden planks, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, but no one was there. The footsteps grew louder, and I saw a shadowy figure approaching. Panic set in and I started to run. The figure followed, its whispers filling the air. I tripped and fell, landing hard on the planks. The figure loomed over me, its face a twisted mask of pain. It whispered, "You can't leave." I scrambled to my feet and ran towards the shore, but the pier seemed to stretch on forever. The figure's cold hand grabbed my shoulder, and I felt myself being pulled into the darkness. When I awoke, I was lying on the shore, the pier nowhere in sight. I later learned that the pier had been destroyed in a storm years ago, and those who visited it were never seen again. 5. The Cursed Brownstone of Greenwich Village. In Greenwich Village, I moved into a charming brownstone with a dark history. The previous occupants had all left under mysterious circumstances, but I was undeterred. The first night, I heard strange noises coming from the basement. It sounded like whispers and the soft tapping of feet. I went to investigate, finding a hidden door behind an old bookshelf. The door led to a small, dark room filled with antique furniture. As I explored, I felt a cold breeze and saw shadows moving in the corners. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and I was plunged into darkness. The whispers grew louder, and I felt a presence behind me. A cold hand touched my shoulder, and I turned to see a ghostly figure with hollow eyes. It whispered, "You can't escape." Panicking, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. The figure moved closer, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. Just as I was about to give up, the door flew open, and I fled upstairs. The next morning, I found the room empty, but the whispers still echoed in my mind. I realized with horror that the brownstone was cursed, and I was the next victim. 6. The Phantom Concert of Times Square. One night in Times Square, I stumbled upon a street performer playing hauntingly beautiful music. The crowd was mesmerized, and I was drawn in by the melody. As I listened, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The performer's face was hidden by shadows, and his eyes seemed to glow. Suddenly, the music changed, becoming darker and more sinister. The crowd began to disperse, but I couldn't move. I was trapped by the music. The performer looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. He whispered, "You're next." Panic set in, and I tried to leave, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The music grew louder, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned to see ghostly figures surrounding me, their eyes empty and hollow. The performer's face twisted into a wicked grin, and I realized I was being claimed by the music. Just as I was about to succumb, I broke free and ran into the night. When I looked back, the performer and the crowd had vanished. I later learned that anyone who heard the Phantom concert was doomed to be haunted by the music forever. 7. The Cursed Antique Shop of Soho. In Soho, I discovered a quaint antique shop filled with curiosities. The shopkeeper warned me that some items were cursed, but I dismissed it as a sales tactic. I bought an old, ornate mirror, intrigued by its beauty. That night, I hung the mirror in my bedroom. As I looked into it, I saw shadows moving behind me. I turned, but no one was there. The mirror's surface began to ripple, and I saw ghostly figures staring back at me. They whispered, "Join us." Terrified, I tried to remove the mirror, but it was firmly attached to the wall. The figures reached out from the glass, their hands cold and clammy. I felt myself being pulled into the mirror, the world around me fading. Just as I was about to disappear, I broke free and fled the apartment. The next morning, I returned to the shop to return the mirror, but it was gone. The shopkeeper handed me a newspaper clipping about a fire that destroyed the shop years ago. I realized with horror that the shop and the mirror had never existed, and I was haunted by their curse forever. 8. The ghostly bar of the East Village. In the East Village, I frequented a bar known for its eclectic atmosphere. One night, I stayed late, chatting with the bartender. As the night wore on, the bar emptied, and the air grew colder. I noticed a man sitting at the end of the bar, his face hidden in shadows. The bartender seemed uneasy and told me to leave, but I was curious. I approached the man, and he looked up, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. He whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The room grew darker, and the shadows seemed to close in. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and turned to see ghostly figures surrounding me. The man at the bar grinned wickedly and said, "You're one of us now." Panicking, I tried to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The figures closed in, their whispers growing louder. Just as I was about to give up, I broke free and fled into the night. The next morning, I discovered that the bar had been abandoned for years, and those who stayed late were never seen again.
Thank you for watching, especially to the subscribers for supporting our stories. What story do you like the most? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales. See you in the next video.